Hello and buongiorno. It is a gorgeous spring day. I'm halfway up a mountain in the Italian-speaking bit of Switzerland.
And this is Lake Lugano, on the border of Switzerland and Italy.
Now, I say the lake is on the border, but right here in this part of the lake, the border does something very weird. Here is Lake Lugano on a map, and here is the international border. And to be clear, that's not the weird bit. The weird bit is this. One small Italian village and an almost perfectly rectangular segment of lake stuck inside Switzerland. So what's that doing there? Or if you've watched one of my borderline insanity videos before, what ridiculous combination of historical circumstances ended up accidentally creating this one? Well, there's only really one way to find out.
Which means I now need to go down there.
Did we come all the way up here just for this scene? This is the tiny Italian territory of Campione d'Italia. Its borders are separated from the rest of Italy by less than a kilometre at their nearest point, but it is completely detached and surrounded by Switzerland, making it technically both an enclave and an exclave at the same time. There's only really one road in and out, so pretty much every visitor is greeted by this ornamental arch, built in the 1930s by a man called Benito Mussolini, who was keen for everyone to know that this is Italy. And just to make sure, he also added the word Italia to the name of the village. Before that, it was just called Campione. Now in English, Campione translates as champion, so this place is literally called Champion of Italy. But despite that, on the surface, it feels just like any other village in the Italian lakes, with its waterfront bars and restaurants, its beautiful old churches, and the houses clinging to the slopes above, all of them trying to get the best view over the lake. However, you don't need to scratch too far below the surface before things start getting a little strange. For example, those waterfront bars display their prices in Swiss francs, but if you try to pay by card, you'll be charged in euros. Meanwhile, ambulances, fire engines and the postal service are all provided by the Swiss, but the police are Italian. And then there's the casino. In most of Italy, you would never see a casino, because generally casinos are banned, but Campione is one of the rare exceptions. There's been a casino here since 1917, when it was originally set up to try and extract secrets from foreign diplomats during World War I. And then in 2007, just before the global financial crisis, Campione decided to replace the relatively modest old building with this. A 9-storey faceless tower of beige-brown concrete that by some measurements is the largest casino in Europe.
It's not often you get to see a piece of architecture that says such a loud to everything else around it.
The Swiss architect Mario Botta recently described the casino of Campione as an out-of-scale building that doesn't fit in with the landscape, and it pains me whenever I see it from Lugano. And what makes that quote particularly damning is that he's the man who built it. But to be fair to Mario, it was really the local government who pushed for the building to be so big, because, well, you can probably guess, the casino generates so much revenue for the coffers that it funds the entire enclave on its own. In other words, people here live more or less tax-free. Or at least, that's how it was supposed to work, until the financial crash arrived, the casino went bankrupt a few years later, and the local economy more or less collapsed overnight. But since 2022, it's back up and running again. Anyway, this casino business is all fun and games, or depending on how you look at it, blatant profiteering from people's gambling addictions. But either way, it doesn't really answer the question, why does the enclave exist in the first place? After all, Campione didn't start with the casino. Technically, it started as a garrison village in Roman times. But how it became an enclave is a whole other story. And it all begins when some rich bloke disagrees with a bishop in the year 777. Now, back in the mid-700s, as I'm sure you remember, there is no such thing as Switzerland yet, and Italy doesn't exist either. So most of the land around Lake Lugano is owned either by Rome and the Pope, or by various rich local landowners. Campione itself belongs to one of these landowners, a man called Totone da Campione. But when Totone dies in 777, he leaves all of his land to the Archbishop of Milan, which was a slightly controversial move from big old Toto, because the man the Pope had put in charge of this area was the Bishop of Como. And as a result, you now had a small patch of land owned by the Archbishop of Milan in the middle of territory owned by the Bishop of Como. But at the end of the day, it all belonged to the Pope, so that little legal distinction didn't really matter. Yet. Fast forward 731 years to 1508, and there is a new Pope in town, Pope Julius II, who names himself not after Pope Julius I, but after the famous peace-loving Christian, Julius Caesar. So it's not a huge surprise when he immediately launches an attack on the Republic of Venice and starts something called the War of the Holy League. And just in case it isn't clear, things in this part of the world are about to go biblically bonkers. To start with, Pope Julius forms an anti-Venetian alliance with France, Spain, and the Holy Roman Empire, and predictably, Venice starts losing quite badly. But then Pope Julius falls out with France to such an extent that he now allies with Venice and starts attacking the French instead. A year later, the Swiss join in as well, because the Pope paid them to, and eventually, France is driven out of the region in 1512. But hang on, what's all that got to do with Campione? Well, to say thank you to Switzerland for helping him beat the French, the Pope decides to give them a small chunk of his own land. And the small chunk that he gives them is a few northern parishes from the territory of the Bishop of Como in the region of Lake Lugano. In other words, everything around Campione now becomes part of Switzerland, except for Campione itself, because legally it still belongs to the Archbishop of Milan. And that is how a small Italian village ended up inside Switzerland. And it also explains why this bit of Switzerland speaks Italian. But it is now more than 500 years since the enclave was created, and more than 1400 years since Totone left the Bishop of Como out of his will. At what point does someone just say, you know what, maybe we should forget the past, get rid of the borders, and simply make Campione part of Switzerland? Well, actually, they already did. The residents of Campione have twice been given the chance to join Switzerland, in 1798 and 1814, and both times they voted against it, before later changing their minds during the Wars of Italian Unification in 1848 and actually asking Switzerland if they would mind ever so much annexing them, only for the Swiss to say, no, we can't do that right now because we're politically neutral. And so Campione remains an enclave and exclave to this day. And one thing's for sure, it is a pretty stunning location. This video is not sponsored by the Campione d'Italia Tourist Board, because I'm pretty sure they don't have one. But let's just say, if you like spending your holidays visiting quirky geographical anomalies, but your friends and family are more, how can I put this, normal, you could do a lot worse than bringing them to the beautiful Italian lakes so that you can sneak in a cheeky little trip to Campione d'Italia. Just don't tell my friends I said that. If you'd like to visit Campione d'Italia, it is served both by boats and buses from nearby Lugano, and Lugano is on the famous Gotthard railway line just over an hour north of Milan or 2 hours south of Zurich. And by the way, the boats, buses and some of the trains also stop at nearby Melide, where you can visit Swiss miniature if that's your sort of thing. And finally, if you're driving, all of this is just a few minutes off the main A2 Autobahn. And as always, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you soon.